Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're venturing into a set of spiritual teachings. These are drawn from sources attributed to Kabir Parmeshwar Ji, Saint Garib Das Ji, and also, well, making reference to the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas.
Right.
What's really striking about these sources is how they seem to outline what you could call a constitution of God. And we're going to delve into what that framework means for our lives, not just now, but maybe even beyond.
That's a great way to put it, actually. These aren't just like abstract spiritual ideas. They present a very specific system.
Okay.
Almost like a divine set of operating principles that govern human existence and, importantly, the consequences of our actions.
Yeah.
And these consequences, according to the teachings, extend into future rebirths.
Right, future rebirths. Okay, let's start with this central idea then, this constitution of God. The sources we have, they really strongly emphasize the role of Holy Scriptures, particularly the Gita and the Vedas, as embodying this divine constitution.
Yes, exactly.
And according to this view, going against these principles has significant repercussions, right? We're talking about a lack of fulfillment, maybe success in our endeavors, and ultimately even hindering our spiritual progress towards salvation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Our sources directly point to the Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 16, verses 23 and 24, to highlight this very point.
Okay.
The idea here is that actions and even forms of worship that deviate from what's laid out in these foundational scriptures are, well, they're not just ineffective in achieving spiritual goals,
Right.
but they can actually lead to negative karmic outcomes. It's presented as a system where alignment with divine law brings positive results, while transgression leads to various forms of suffering.
And it gets quite detailed, doesn't it? I mean, one aspect that really stood out is this concept of forbidden worship, which includes practices like ancestor worship or Shraddha. You mentioned the Bhagavad Gita reference, chapter 9, verse 25. For many, this might seem, while contradictory to established traditions. Could you elaborate on the reasoning there within these teachings?
That's a key question.
Yeah.
Within this specific framework, the focus is very much on the worship of the Supreme God as prescribed in the core scriptures themselves.
Okay.
So practices directed towards ancestors, while often culturally significant, they're seen here as not leading to true spiritual liberation or like union of the divine as defined by these particular teachings. The emphasis is really on a direct relationship with the ultimate source, guided by scriptural authority.
Got it. Now, let's shift to this concept of Dharamraja's accounting of deeds. It sounds like a system of divine record-keeping almost, where our actions have consequences that are tallied up.
Yes.
Our sources give some pretty direct examples, especially concerning how we treat animals.
Yes. This is a really significant aspect of this constitution of God. The teachings are very, very clear that harming animals and consuming meat are considered serious transgressions.
Serious, okay.
Those who do so are sometimes referred to as kafirs within this specific context. There's a strong underlying belief in the interconnectedness of all life and the inevitable karmic repercussions of inflicting suffering. Think of these consequences not just as like punishments, but maybe as natural outcomes of actions that create imbalance within the divine order. A bit like breaking physical laws leads to predictable results.
And it's not just the act of killing, is it? It's the consumption itself that carries weight. According to these sources, there's a quote here, "Those who kill living beings commit visible sins. No one has ever attained heaven by committing such sins." That's pretty definitive.
It is. It's very direct. And it goes on to specify potential consequences. The sources explain that partaking in meat and causing harm to living beings can lead to the individual being reborn as the very animal they harmed. Essentially experiencing the suffering they inflicted. This concept of direct karmic feedback is quite a vivid illustration of the principles they're describing.
Yeah, it really is. There are also some other interesting prohibitions mentioned. Smoking hookah, for instance, that's linked to being an oppressor. And then we have some very specific consequences laid out for other actions, like adultery potentially leading to blindness for 70 lifetimes, and consuming alcohol resulting in rebirth as a dog for 70 lifetimes. These are pretty severe outcomes within this framework.
They are indeed, and this really highlights the level of detail and specificity within this constitution of God. It's not just a general sense of right and wrong, but very particular actions linked to specific karmic repercussions, potentially unfolding across numerous lifetimes. The inclusion of something like smoking hookah alongside more traditionally recognized sins really underscores the breadth of this divine accounting system. Think of a Dharmraj as the divine recorder, or judge perhaps, who tallies the karmic consequences of our actions after death, according to these teachings.
This brings us then to the crucial role of a true saint, or guru. Given this really intricate system of divine law and consequences, how does one even begin to navigate it? According to our sources, a true saint seems absolutely indispensable. Why is that?
That's a key question, yeah. The teachings emphasize that the company of a true saint is attained through spiritual discourse. And importantly, a complete saint is the one who can truly reveal the true constitution of God.
Oh, okay.
They're seen as possessing the authentic knowledge and serving as a vital guide on the spiritual path.
So it's not enough just to have good intentions or, perform good deeds independently. The sources suggest that receiving initiation from a complete saint and then engaging in devotion, acts of charity, righteous conduct under their guidance, these are necessary steps.
Precisely. Necessary to avoid negative rebirths after our accumulated good karma is, well, exhausted.
Right.
There's a quote from the Sukshma Veda that underscores this. Kabir, those who chant beads without a guru, those who donate without a guru, both are futile.
Futile. Okay.
The underlying principle is that without the authentic guidance and initiation from a genuine spiritual teacher, our efforts in devotion and charity might not yield the intended spiritual benefits or lead to true liberation as defined by these teachings. The Sukshma Veda, by the way, is considered a sacred text within this tradition, believed to hold profound spiritual knowledge.
And the sources we have specifically mentioned taking refuge in a complete guru, even identifying St. Rampalji Maharaj as the complete guru currently on earth.
Yes, they do.
Who can impart scripture-based devotion and ultimately lead to salvation. That's a very specific assertion.
It is. And it really underscores the significant importance placed on having a living, enlightened spiritual guide. Someone who can accurately interpret and transmit what is considered divine knowledge. The emphasis is clearly on receiving authentic, scripture-based guidance rather than following teachings that might be incomplete or misinterpreted.
Right. Now, moving beyond the guru's role, our sources also highlight very specific prohibitions and guidelines for daily life. Intoxicants seem to be a major area of concern.
Absolutely, a huge one. Substances like liquor, bang, tobacco, opium. They're all listed as significant impediments to true worship.
Impediments.
And are seen as leading to spiritual ruin. Disciples of St. Rampalji Maharaj are described as avoiding even touching these substances. It demonstrates a very strict adherence to this principle.
Wow. There's a particularly strong condemnation of tobacco, isn't there? Likened to cow's blood and filth. Complete avoidance urged. That really emphasizes the severity with which intoxicants are viewed.
It certainly does. And it's interesting to see how these teachings integrate into the practical aspects of everyday living. It's not solely about grand spiritual practices, but also about the seemingly smaller choices, like what we consume daily.
Interestingly, the sources also touch upon balance, even referencing the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 16, advising against extremes in eating and sleeping. But fasting, surprisingly, is presented as a violation in this context. Could you elaborate on that rationale?
Yes, the emphasis here seems to be on moderation rather than engaging in harsh asceticism or extreme practices. The idea presented is that true devotion can be practiced effectively while living a balanced life. Extremes like excessive fasting are viewed as potentially counterproductive to spiritual progress.
How so?
Well, they might disrupt one's physical and mental capacity to engage in devotion in a meaningful, sustained way.
Okay, that makes sense. So what is the ultimate aim within this constitution of God? It appears to be salvation and liberation. How is that achieved according to these teachings?
Salvation, according to these sources, is attained solely through the guidance of a true guru and by engaging in scripture-based devotion.
Only through the guru.
That's the strong emphasis. It's the combination of authentic spiritual instruction and the correct devotional practices that leads to liberation from the cycle of birth and death, as understood within this specific framework.
And it's noteworthy that physically renouncing worldly life, leaving home for the wilderness or engaging in extreme asceticism isn't necessarily required.
Right.
St. Giridhas Ji's teachings suggest salvation can be attained while living a householder's life. That might be a relevant, maybe encouraging perspective for many listeners.
That's a really significant point. It broadens the accessibility of spirituality, suggesting one doesn't have to abandon everyday responsibilities to pursue spiritual liberation. True devotion, guided by a true guru and aligned with scriptural principles, can apparently be integrated into the fabric of ordinary life.
There's also a compelling claim about the protection afforded by surrendering to a complete guru. even hinting at the possibility of averting severe calamities. The example given, avoiding death on the gallows, is quite dramatic.
It is, and it speaks to the transformative power attributed to the guidance and grace of a genuine spiritual master within this belief system. It suggests a profound connection between the devotee and the divine, mediated through the guru's spiritual authority.
On the flip side, though, the sources also issue some stark warnings about the consequences of rejecting devotion.
Yes, very stark.
Those who reject the name of Ram are said to face severe repercussions. Things like contracting leprosy, being reborn as pigs. These are, again, very intense warnings.
They certainly are, and they serve as a powerful reminder of the paramount importance placed on actively engaging in devotion within this constitution of God. Neglecting or outright rejecting the prescribed path to salvation is presented as having significant negative consequences, both in this life and potentially in future rebirths.
The importance of making the most of human life is another recurring theme, isn't it?
Definitely.
Our sources emphasize that individuals who waste their human existence without engaging in devotion will face suffering as animals in subsequent lives. There's a real sense of urgency conveyed.
Yeah.
Utilize this precious human birth for spiritual growth.
Yes, human life is presented as this invaluable, perhaps unique opportunity specifically for spiritual advancement and liberation. Squandering this opportunity without pursuing devotion is viewed as a serious error that will inevitably lead to regret and continued suffering within the cycle of reincarnation, according to these teachings.
Finally, our sources touch upon the concept of a divine court in the administration of justice. It appears that after death, an accounting of our accumulated karma takes place.
That's the idea presented.
And consequences await those who haven't engaged in true devotion or have adhered to what are considered false rituals. The idea that no one can ultimately escape divine justice within the three realms, that's a rather sobering thought.
It really reinforces the concept of a universal law of cause and effect, one that extends beyond our earthly existence, our actions or choices, and importantly, our engagement or lack thereof with the path to salvation have ramifications that will apparently be faced in the divine realm.
So to recap our deep dive into these sources today, we've explored a really comprehensive spiritual framework, grounded in what's described as a divine constitution found within the Gita and Vedas. We've discussed the consequences of not adhering to this constitution, the absolutely crucial role of a true guru in guiding towards authentic, scripture-based devotion.
Crucial, yes.
And specific guidelines for living, including those clear prohibitions against consuming meat and intoxicants. Ultimately, the aim is salvation, which these sources say is attainable through the guidance of a true guru and sincere devotion. It really underscores the immense value placed on this human life.
Exactly. It's a holistic system. It addresses not just overarching spiritual principles, but also the practical details of our daily conduct, all within this framework of divine law and its associated consequences.
You know, considering this detailed system of divine law and its resulting consequences, it really prompts us to reflect, doesn't it, on the nature of our individual responsibility and the potential lasting impact of the choices we make, perhaps extending far beyond our current lifetime. Does this framework invite a deeper self-awareness, maybe a reevaluation of our actions and even our deeply held beliefs? It certainly provides ample food for thought long after our deep dive concludes.